Hi everyone, welcome. We are so excited to have you here. I hope you all had a great Thursday. We have another great session planned for you all today. So before we begin, I would like to again give you a brief introduction of Women in Data for people who are joining us for the first time. So Women in Data is a nonprofit organization with a mission to increase diversity in data careers. We provide awareness, education, and advancement to women in the tech industry, specifically in data science. Moving on. So who would be our member, right? We have different types of members. We have the newbie, transitioner, and data enthusiast. People who are just starting off in data science and need some guidance could join us. Women or people who have already been in the data industry or IT industry for a long time, but now transition to join a data-focused career can also join our team, our community. And lastly, people who have been in this industry and area working for a while and want to be a leader can join our group as well. So we encourage you all to please go and check the womenindata.org/join us URL to look at the different membership opportunity that we provide. Before we begin, let's talk housekeeping. So again, Sangeeta already muted everyone just to avoid unnecessary background noise. Feel free to type your questions in the chat box and we will make sure to review them in the end. I'm very excited for our session today. We have Kariz joining us and I'm looking forward to hear about her personal journey and learn a lot from her. So welcome, Kariz, and now I hand it over to Deepti.
Thank you, Kanchan, and hi everybody. I'm so honored to introduce Kariz to all of you. She is a mom, a philanthropist, and a mentor. She is very active in communities and programs that amplify underrepresented voices around the world. She is a maker at heart, and her creativity is expressed when she is crafting, making food, and riding bikes. In her professional life, she has enjoyed being an analyst, an engineer, a speaker, an instructor, a manager, leader, founder, a board member, and an advisor so far. Kariz Matic has spent over 20 years creating systems and technology for companies like Cisco, Nestle, Genentech, with work that has led to 7-figure cost reductions and revenue growth. She is the CEO of The Matic, a consultancy that specializes in analytics, user research, as well as product and program management. She believes system of information, process, and automation allow us to discover more ways to share our talents, serve our community, and deliver value. That's why she's dedicated her career to finding those refinements, one product, one workflow, and a data point at a time. Kariz, we are delighted to host you today. The stage is all yours.
Thank you so much, Deepti. Wow, I don't think I've ever heard anyone actually read that in front of me. So let me just take that in for a second. All right. Well, for those of you who are wondering, my family name is Matic and my first name is Kariz. But that's really more of a story about how adventurous and funny my parents are. So I'm going to save that one for later, maybe for the Q&A later. Let's get started. To make way for the things we want to do, we need efficiency in the things we have to do. Data guides how we create those efficiencies, and technology helps to accelerate that. That has been the guiding light of my career, and this is a small part of how I got here. I started my teens with the vision of growing up to be an artist, and my ambitions kept a full schedule of extracurricular activities outside of my regular schooling. When I had a baby at 15, most of the adults around me told me that I needed to focus on my new responsibilities and that pursuing my artistic dreams were no longer a practical option. There was definitely a part of me that believed having a baby had now limited my real options. But I couldn't just give up my dreams altogether. So I looked for a new mission. I started working before I finished high school. Juggling parenthood, school, and work meant needing more structure and organization, and my creative energy found its new outlet. There was a lot to do, so I looked for faster and more efficient ways to do everything. And when I say everything, I mean everything. Once I worked for a chain of dry cleaners, and we used different tags to label clothing. I wanted to do that faster, so I created bins to sort the tags and a process to sort the clothes before tagging. I did it in my personal life too. When I got my first apartment with my toddler, I organized the kitchen cabinets in the fridge to make cereal and milk easy for her to access, so she could feed herself breakfast, and I wouldn't always have to get up so early on Saturday mornings. That was before I became an early bird. I didn't know this at the time, but this compulsion to stay organized would eventually become one of my superpowers. By the time I was 19, I was working customer service at a small and popular fashion company. I took calls from frustrated customers whose orders were constantly delayed, incorrect, incomplete, or just never delivered. This was not a fun part of my job, so I wanted to understand why it was happening to see if there was anything I could fix. It led me to discover that our ordering system wasn't connected to our manufacturing runs. Not only did this create production gaps, but it was also the source of our overruns. That is, a surplus of product that was never even ordered, and it would need to be sold heavily discounted at the end of every season. So using the information I could gather, I modeled a production system that connected what our customers were ordering with what was being delivered. I went to my boss, the owner of the company, and shared a story about our gaps and the inefficiencies told from the data that I had organized. I proposed a new manufacturing schedule that offered a way to fix most of those gaps. And to my surprise, he agreed to give it a try. In the first year of that new schedule, the company revenue grew from $500,000 to $5 million. All I really wanted was to reduce my time spent on customer complaints. But that quick growth earned me a VP of Operations title in this small company and the privilege of choosing any projects I wanted. I shifted my focus to order fulfillment, and at around the same time, we were implementing a new AS400 system. In looking to pinpoint our process gaps, I'd ask the programmer for the data I needed and would tell him about the different reports I was trying to create. Instead of coming back with raw data, he'd bring the report already sorted, organized, and calculated to my specifications. Something I had actually planned for days to do myself only took him a few hours to create. So naturally, I kept asking for more. Eventually, he got irritated by my interruptions and decided that he should teach me how to run my own reports. Now, I'd learned a little bit of BASIC and DOS with a home computer before, but this was my first programming experience with data, and I was able to use it for process improvements, which got me hooked. I wasn't yet clear on what exactly I wanted to do, but my excitement about how fast I could do what I needed told me I wanted a career around tech. So I decided to start looking for work that gave me more exposure to technology. I probably went to hundreds of interviews and repeatedly heard what I'd already been expecting. No degree, no background, no experience, no job. But I kept applying, and every time I scheduled another interview, it felt like a little crack in the ceiling. It took about a year for my first offer to arrive. The position I was offered didn't work as part of a technology team, but it did offer longevity. Most of the interviewers had been working in their roles for many years, and it was probably also why it was hard to picture how I might have room to grow. Having waited that long, I figured it was no more of a risk to continue waiting, so I politely said thanks, but no thanks to that offer. It only took another month or so, but it felt like another year. And just when I thought I'd made a mistake not accepting that first offer, I landed my first official tech job and the beginning of my corporate career. I became a help desk technician for a 10,000 person company in a small team of engineers. I was hired because of my customer service skills and my then limited knowledge of MS Office. My main job was to provide basic MS Office support so that the 4 senior engineers could focus on more complex technical work. When I wasn't taking calls, I shadowed whichever engineer was available, and I learned how to build desktops and servers, how to set up and configure operating systems, local area networks, and how to service other kinds of equipment. Basically, I learned all the routine work that wasn't as fun or interesting for the senior engineers. When they were all busy, I used that time to read the MS Office manual from front to back to boost skills in my own role. In fact, when we needed a system to track equipment loaners, I volunteered so that I could test out my new MS Access skills. My first complete application allowed our small team to keep an inventory of loaners that tracked who had them and when they were leaving our facilities. The information we then gathered also allowed us to establish and enforce policies and protocols that gave our department better management over the equipment we were responsible for. Having built a simple tool that gave us the power to manage a large pool of assets combined the powerful trifecta that I now call insight, process, and automation. But back then, I was just excited I made a product that worked and that it helped us do something better. This was also about the time I realized that I wanted to focus my career on building systems for creating software. It took a few more years and a few other corporate jobs to figure out what that looked like. Along the way, I volunteered for every opportunity I could find to deepen my organizational and systems building skills. I built and automated tools for tracking performance stats. I made bots for routine troubleshooting tasks. I even set up systems for tracking team social activities. At some point in one of those jobs, my primary role shifted from support analyst to reporting analyst, and I became responsible for producing all reports for our department. Content was housed in multiple relational database systems, so I read more manuals and taught myself TSQL and PLSQL, so I could access the data, create data sets, and build views and queries for reporting. I had a feeling I'd gotten pretty good at it when other departments started asking me for SQL advice and support. I was always eager to help because it also meant getting to see another part of these big companies I worked for. Who knew it also meant great exposure? The asset management team needed a way to capture and validate software asset information for a company-wide workstation migration. They initially asked for my help in building reports against a data set that they had already assembled. But the reports I created just exposed how old, unclean, and inaccurate that data was. So instead, they decided they wanted to collect this information from all of the 20,000 workers across North America. And since I was already familiar with the project, I was a shoo-in for creating the solution. For this tool, I also needed to create user interfaces. So I went to W3 schools and taught myself web architecture, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Once I built the application, someone else wanted to use the data to boost and streamline the company's purchasing processes. To accommodate these evolving requirements, I spent many days working by myself, designing data models and application workflow, troubleshooting code, and making enhancement updates. I really enjoyed the work, but I was lonely and I missed interacting and collaborating with others. It was a relief when the original project ended and I was able to transition my work to a new vendor team. Meanwhile, my deep dive into this data offered unique insights for our application integrations. And I'm pretty sure that's why I was then promoted to be part of the new team responsible for delivery and oversight of our vendor activities. There, I established management frameworks and methodologies for measuring vendor performance and for introducing new software to our environment. I was also responsible for the application development and release team, a multidisciplinary crew of internal and external members across 5 different countries, responsible for developing, integrating, and deploying new software for our region. Working with other engineers was a great transition into a management role because it didn't just completely ignore the technical chops I'd worked so hard to build. Fast forward a little bit, I was probably 1 or 2 semesters short of completing my bachelor's degree by the time I realized that school was just too low on my list of priorities, being upstaged by my more than full-time job and the time I still wanted to spend with my family. My bosses insisted that without it, I'd be nearing the peak of my corporate career. It was a bit crushing because inside, I felt like I was finally just getting going. One day, I attended a work event where Sally Ride, the first American woman in space, spoke about her experiences as one of the first female astronauts at NASA. She talked about using the challenges her cohort faced to create new innovations in space travel. She also talked about her work in creating opportunities for more women to thrive in STEM. Her sentiments resonated with me in a way that made me want to be actively involved in this ecosystem of women in tech, and it reinvigorated my drive towards my own career pursuits. This sparked the confidence I needed to start exploring options outside of the corporate world to see how else I could continue to grow. It was scary to step outside of an environment I'd known for so long, but I was really searching. So I started doing a little bit of consulting work. Not long after, my own daughter graduated from high school, and when she left to chase her own pursuits, it felt like the right time to follow a longtime dream to move to San Francisco. I mean, why not, right? After all, by then, I'd already had 10 years in corporate and a couple of years consulting with solid skills in process development, product engineering, and project and program management. Arriving in the Bay Area, I quickly realized that I also needed a network. I thought it'd be easy since I was already an extrovert, but it turns out being an extrovert has nothing to do with networking. What I needed was to learn how to have conversations in a way that could build and cultivate professional relationships. To be honest, I'm still not really sure I do this very well, but I must have done a few things right. Because after about a year of trial and error, I started to see some fruits to my labor. I supported projects for a mix of corporate, startup, and small business clients, all with very different needs. I presented insights, created strategies, designed new products, and built and managed product design and engineering teams. In 2012, I decided to make it official. I'd formalize my consulting work and start my own business and call it Matic. I wanted to have my own software product development team so I could provide a more robust offering to future clients. I had no idea how to run a company and all the other aspects of having a business. Thinking, planning for, spending time and money on operations, finance, resourcing, marketing, and more importantly, sales. I just expected if I built the company, the clients would come. And as I fumbled through what felt like a suddenly informal MBA, I needed to figure out how I could make enough money. So I continued to diversify my work. And that's how I stumbled into my next niche. A colleague had asked if I could use my expertise to help marketers make sense of their analytics. It was a great way to learn about marketing, but even more than that, this eventually is what showed me that I could apply my strategic thought processes and methodologies to those other areas of my business. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's be real, that only happened after I got a little bit sidetracked. So I started the marketing work producing private client white papers and soon expanded into presenting and teaching digital marketing techniques, hosting social media workshops, and speaking at conferences around the country. In keeping with my insight process and automation roots, I researched many different marketing products so that I could recommend tools to automate the techniques I was sharing. One of those techniques showed great results, but it was cumbersome to do, and at the time, I couldn't find tools that supported the most difficult parts of the process. I built Google spreadsheets and created templates to try to reduce the complexity, but my users still couldn't sustain it without more automation. I then realized that this was a gap in the marketplace and that I had an emerging product idea. Some proven insights, a process created, and a lot of the automation already ideated from client feedback. So you'd think I'd immediately jump on it since I'd already been building products for other clients. But being so close to the struggle of other founders is actually what intimidated me. Also, I was still learning what it meant to be a CEO for Matic. I didn't know what else I didn't know about leading a company around a product. I definitely didn't have money to put into another business. And yet, this idea kept nagging at me. As I was working to figure out if and how I could build this product without abandoning the Matic, a client from my early consulting days reached out and asked me to help set up one of their technology service groups. Although it was a temporary post, it did mean entire days dedicated to that work, which meant very little time, if any, to grow the Matic, never mind building a new product. I was conflicted at first, but then I was able to negotiate a rate that allowed me to carve out a small budget to start working on my own product. So I decided I'd find a way to turn this into a good pivot. For the duration of that engagement, I put aside pursuing other clients for the Matic and used my product development team to help me build my product. For a couple of years, I traveled and worked with my client teams during the day and used any available time and energy at the end to work on my product. As a service provider, my clients' needs always came first. Unfortunately, this also meant that as a subject matter expert and product owner, I was the constant bottleneck in our product development process. It was exhausting, but by the end of that client engagement, I was also the proud founder of a new product, Champagne, the social media distribution for content marketers. But that wasn't the only gift I got out of that experience. As it turns out, that customer service mentality had been helping me build enough of a network and reputation all along that even when I wasn't actively looking for new clients, a few project opportunities still showed up for the Matic. In addition to having built Champagne, our notable product work now also includes a data visualization and cost modeling tool, a global manufacturing analytics solution, a workflow management application for a legal advocacy group, and the modernization of a bank application process. And it also gave me a little more time to figure out how to use my strengths to lead my company. Today, the Matic continues to work on Champagne, and we're learning lessons that become valuable insights that translate to improved processes for designing and developing software for our clients. Recently, we worked with a client that had been in their industry for several decades. We didn't just create user experiences and a roadmap for their new product offering. Our process and techniques became the new model for the methodology their engineering team uses today. That's right. My obsession with being organized has become a foundational component that not only contributes to our own success, but the success of our clients beyond the work we do together. Even though they didn't feel particularly pivotal or momentous back then, it's much easier to look back now and connect how those events contributed to my entrepreneurial journey so far. Some will say it's been a lot of luck and good timing, and they're right, but only partially. I also could have given up because I didn't know how to run a business. I didn't have a network or a degree. I could have stayed in customer service or fashion. I could have even let the stigma of a teen pregnancy limit my possibilities. But I didn't. Instead, I found a creative outlet in my new responsibilities, allowed my excitement to give me direction, and I used whichever skills were available to me at the time to help move myself forward. Judging from how much change we've all experienced this year, we'll probably all be looking back at moments this year that helped move some important part of our lives forward. So I want to pivot now, and let me ask you this question. How can we make this moment help move you forward in the right direction?
Really, that was such an inspiring story, and thank you so much for sharing with us. And we definitely have a bunch of questions that we want to talk to you about, and we will give the audience an opportunity to also speak to you at the end, like, if they have any questions that they want to take forward. But oh my God, hats off to you. Thank you so much again. Sangeeta, I'll hand it over to you for the question.
Sure. And I must say, Kariz, congratulations for all your achievements. I mean, you should, I hope you give enough pats on your back from if you see yourself you were at 15 and where you are now. It's awesome.
Thank you
And
so much.
thank you for sharing all that with all of us over here. It's very inspiring. And well, I would like to get to know a little more about you.
Sure.
So I do have a few questions. Would like to start with, I know it had been a long journey so far. And
Yes.
can you, yeah, right? And so can you share some challenges that you have faced? I'm sure there must have been quite a few.
Oh my gosh. Yes. So many. I mean, do you want me to just talk about my challenges today or?
Anything that you would like to share, yeah.
Yeah, I think my biggest challenge actually is myself. I have a lot of things to work on for myself, my confidence, my imposter syndrome. I keep a guest list here of all the things that challenge me. I've got my self-doubt, I've got my imposter syndrome, her name's Imelda. I've got my inner critic, her name's Constance. I've got the perfectionist, her name's Priscilla. And I don't know if you noticed, but my self-doubt doesn't have a name because every time I think I've got a name for her, she's like, no, I don't think that's it. So she just doesn't have a name. And I think that is the biggest obstacle for me is being able to pause and reflect on where I am now and acknowledge and recognize that I've made a lot of strides. In fact, that's probably what made writing this talk so difficult, is that every time I wrote a story or chose a story to tell, all of those guests started to show up and started to give me lots of doubts about, is that the right story to tell? Is that interesting enough? Does that relate to the, and to me, data is such a big part of how my career has progressed that I have such a big crush on everybody on this call that I was so intimidated to come here and tell you my story. So I'd say probably my biggest challenge is just trying to get past all of that on a constant basis, and enough to be able to get something done.
Right. I mean, my next question would have been, how do you handle self-doubts? And I see you have a very good strategy of writing down. And, the imposter syndrome, I think we all have it wherever we are, every new role that we get into, we do have that. And wow, that's a great way to handle it. Yes. So apart from that, what other advice would you give for someone who is starting out? Especially, in the field of data, we are mostly all of us over here are from that background or want to be getting involved in data science or data related fields. So do you have some advice for us how to start out?
I think for me, my perception of it when I'm speaking to the industry, there's this perception that you have to be working on large, complex amounts of data, and that's the thing that will demonstrate your value. But sometimes it's like the smallest pieces of insights that you can share, or small data sets that you can do something to improve, something that just helps 3 people, that sort of gets your juices going. So I think it's not so much, it's about not qualifying whatever that is, that the data sets or however you're working with data. Just know that if you have an interest in it, find the path that helps you use whatever skills you have and whatever data sets are available to you to make sense of and help somebody else. Because ultimately, it doesn't have, I'm trying to think of a good example where I think, sorry, I'm trying to choose an example of a smaller data set that I've had to work with. And I would say maybe that loaner application that I made, right? It's not a very big deal. And when I first built that application and we started using it, it literally was just to track loaners that were coming in and out of our department. And our department was like a 5-person department, right? So I was really only helping our tiny little department. But because I organized the information in a way that allowed us to see, oh, this person's borrowing, too many loaners at once, or it allowed us to create these new policies and procedures about how long you can borrow equipment, how many pieces of equipment you can borrow. And that starts to influence other policies and procedures outside of our department. So sometimes it's about like focusing on the smallest piece of improvement that you can make that will snowball into the next thing. And I think our tendency might be to minimize whatever that is that we're working on, because we're working on such a small element of a bigger thing that it doesn't feel like we're contributing, but know that you are. And yes, for sure, it never feels like that when you're in it, but over time, when you look back, you'll see how much value even those smallest pieces of work that you're doing contributes to the bigger work.
That's so true. Yes, I agree with that. Every small piece of work that you do counts.
Yes.
True. Right? Next question would be, how would you outline your typical day? How does it? I know it's pretty busy, I'm sure. But
I thought this was a funny question, because as much as I love process and system, I don't like to feel constrained to one. I like to think there's a little bit of flexibility in the things that I do. So instead of course, I have a calendar and I have appointments lined up and meetings and things like that. But I actually try to keep things very flexible. So I don't know if there were enough people on the call, but earlier I mentioned I'm an early bird. I don't have an alarm clock, but I get up at like 5 in the morning anyway. I don't know why. Maybe it's a thing that happened after I turned 40. Not really sure. But so generally speaking, I get up somewhere between 4:30 and 6 a.m. and I just don't really worry about how much variation happens in between. I used to agonize about it, but I'm like, okay, well, that's my body telling me I've had enough sleep, right? So between about 4:30, if I get up at 4:30, and about 7 a.m., I do all of my self preparation. So it's the meditation, I have breakfast, I organize my day, I look at my calendar and see how much wiggle room there's actually in there. I negotiate walks with my husband. Don't think I've mentioned him yet, but we both have almost always worked from home, so we take walks together and we have to coordinate our schedules to figure out when we're going to do that. And then the next part of my day is when the rest of the team is actually awake. So the next block is really about running the business, right? So it's meetings around operations, finance. Well, actually, that's not true for our finance meetings right now, but I like to have like the first part of our day sort of internally looking. How do we get ready for the day? What are the things we're working on? How do we continue to organize ourselves? Because organization by yourself is very different from organizing when there's multiple people involved, right? And that happens until about 10 a.m. And between 10 and about 2 p.m. is really when client work happens. So if we're working on projects, if we're working on a client project or we're working on something else, all of that work tends to happen between 10 and 2. And back when we used to be able to see our clients in person, those would also be the times I'd show up to the client facility and have meetings, go to lunch, have an extra long lunch, drive home, whatever the scenario is. So that would take up until about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And then after that, between 2 and whenever my brain is done working, which is pretty soon after, probably around 4 or 5, I probably at around 2 or 3 o'clock, I'm already thinking about the walk I want to take. But if I still have stuff to do, or if I have meetings scheduled, usually between 2 and 5 are networking calls, meetings with other folks. With some exception, of course, if I'm speaking with somebody on the East Coast, then that generally happens maybe like between 11 and 2 p.m. for me, since I'm in Pacific time zone. And then at the end of the day, I also have a few rituals that I follow for myself. I cannot leave my desk messy. So I have to, again, reorganize and prep for the next day. So a little bit of that reorganization and prep happens at the end of the day, but then I also do a little bit of prep work at the beginning of the day.
Wow. Okay. That's a good thing, right? I mean, you have to do some self-care as well. It's not just always business, right?
Yes.
Okay. That's
Very
true.
important.
I believe through all these years, it had not always been a bed of roses for you,
Oh, no.
right? So what advice do you have, or how have you dealt with failure?
Oh, so many different ways. So, you know, when my daughter was really young, and she faced disappointment at school or in her social life, I used to make her write down, like I used to force her to write down 10 things that she was grateful for in her day. And over time, I realized I wasn't doing that for myself. So then I started forcing myself to do it. And I'll be honest, it doesn't happen every day. It's on my list of things to do every day, but it doesn't happen every day. But when I'm having a day where I just, I can't focus, or nothing's going right, or I feel like things aren't moving fast enough, or things aren't moving in the direction I want, or I'm just very lost. For me, that's been probably, of all the things that I try to do for myself, that's been the most successful in bringing me back to, oh, right, I'm grateful that all of these things exist. I like to say, you know, entrepreneurship, or even any other part of my career, if I really think about it, it's a privilege to have been able to have developed the skills, to have been able to be in the right places, to have been able to have the time to commit to those things. I mean, so many different factors that contribute to that. And when I bring myself back to that, it actually just happened to me yesterday that I was not feeling 100%, but I had a meeting with someone, and I hadn't met with her in a few months. And I actually gave her a kind of a download of what's been going on with the business. And I realized, oh, things are moving. I shouldn't be so frustrated when how things are going. So I think like just a general exercise in gratitude, and just giving yourself the space and the moment to actually recognize all those little things that really are contributing to the successes that may not even feel like success to you.
Right. Before I go on with the next question, I would just like to remind the audience, if you have any question, feel free to type that down in the chat window, and I would love to take that up in a few minutes. So now getting on. You did mention, you did mention that, you know, networking is not just being an extrovert, right?
Oh.
So what tips would you have for us? How can we get better with networking, meaningful networking, that is?
Sure. Well, my focus, or the way I approach networking today, is sort of leaning back on that customer service aspect, right? I want to be of service to you. How can my resources, my network, my skills, whatever is in my sphere of influence and capabilities, how can that support what you want to do? And when I am talking to other people in a professional setting, that is the mindset that I show up with. Because to me, if I can continue to support you, then I believe most of you will want to do the same for me. I would say it's more about thinking about how your resources can support the other person, because those resources you may not even realize how important those resources are. And it could be a game changer for somebody you're talking to. So if you're in the mindset of, this person needs XYZ, I happen to know somebody who has X. Let me make that introduction for you. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah, that does. So now coming to COVID, has COVID impacted your business at all?
I would say it has. We actually had planned to spend a lot of this year retooling the Matic a bit. So we just went through a rebrand. You're looking at our new logo and our new branding assets. And working through a sales strategy. So up until I guess last year, 2 years ago, because I was really focused on building Champagne and working with that other client, I hadn't spent a lot of time doing a lot of marketing and sales. So this year was about re-energizing those initiatives or those strategies, building those strategies, and then re-energizing the actions around that. So in that sense, I had planned on a lot of our time to be spent internally anyway. I think the biggest impact for us is that I have really learned how to combine my extroversion with this networking bit. And my big plan this year was to go to a bunch of conferences, to meet a bunch of people in person. So spending a little bit of time kind of retooling, or before even retooling that idea, just accepting that idea was not going to work this year. It took a little bit of emotional effort to be able to separate myself from that idea, because in my mind, I'm like, that's how I'm going to drive success this year. So I think just, I can't find the right word, but being able to accept that I would need to think through a new strategy, and then actually building that new strategy to try and figure out how I'm going to put myself out there and showcase our work has been our biggest challenge.
True. I think everyone here have been impacted by COVID some way or the other. True.
Yes.
Okay, we do have a question in the chat. Hey, from Kanchan. So what are the pitfalls or drawbacks of being an entrepreneur?
I don't know if there are any. I mean, I guess I don't like to think of them as drawbacks, because in my mind, it's just an exchange, right? So I think as an early entrepreneur, the income instability is super stressful. So if you are not comfortable with a lot of risk, maybe you'll have to build in a lot of buffer to make that leap. Or if you're not comfortable with a lot of risk, if you don't have that buffer, you might exit too fast. You might abandon that idea before it has a chance to take off, right? So I think, to me, that's not really a drawback, more than you just have to plan for it. And I think we all handle and look at risk very differently. I've got some friends who tell me I can never start my own business because I don't like that instability. And yes, there is a lot of instability, especially if you've never run your own business and weren't thinking about all those things like I wasn't, like operations and finance and marketing. And, you know, I just thought I'll start my own business because I really love what I do and I'm good at it. And I want to do this for other people. But that's not enough, right? So there's a lot of learning around other aspects of the business that may not be as fun for you, or may not come as naturally as the work you love to do. So I think, and if you don't have enough support or capital or a buffer, then you will find yourself having to do a lot of those things yourself. I think I fell into that in the beginning, and in a way it was kind of good because I had to learn how to do those things myself. And I also learned that I didn't like doing a lot of those things myself. So in a way it was a good learning experience, but I think if you can think ahead and try to figure out how you're going to resolve that, if it's something you want to do, if it's something you want to pass on to someone, do you have enough budget for it? So a little bit of planning would probably help buffer a little bit of those pitfalls.
Thank you for that, Kariz. So on top of that, I guess, just piggybacking on that,
Sure.
the question that comes to my mind is like, how would you know when you're ready to become an entrepreneur, right? Like basically, everybody thinks about becoming an entrepreneur. When do you know you're ready?
I kind of have a philosophical answer to this question. My philosophical answer is, if you're no longer giving 100% to whatever else you're doing, then you are disservicing yourself, you're disservicing whoever you're working for, and you're disservicing the rest of us because you're not dedicating your gifts to us. And you're not able to express your gifts fully. So to me, that readiness sometimes is about your sense of urgency, right? Like you're so distracted by having to do this thing that you're no longer able to do whatever job you're working. Maybe it's time to start considering that. Readiness, I feel like you're never really gonna feel ready. I mean, here's what's happened to me, right? And not even just in becoming an entrepreneur, but just in my own career, is that I have this goal I set for myself, and I'm like, oh, cool, I'm gonna, build up my skills and work towards that goal. And I get close enough to that goal that I know exactly how I'm gonna get there. And it's very, like, the data tells me it's highly probable I'm gonna get there. So then I shift my goal a little bit, and then I keep working and I surpass that original goal, but I'm already looking up here. So, I'm like, still I'm not gonna get there. And, if I just kept using my own meter as a readiness meter, I may just never do anything, or I may not ever take those risks. So I think, yes, the more prepared you are, of course, the higher your probability of success. But there's also like a trade-off to how much of your own personal energy are you able to contribute to the thing that's in front of you, versus if you just pivoted and, started really figuring out how to do the thing you really want to do. And you don't have to jump in you don't have to fully jump in. There are ways that you can explore those paths in smaller incremental ways. And, just going back to that idea of those small things adding value to the bigger things, you can do that for yourself too. Maybe there's a small project you can contribute to, or maybe there's a way you can offer your skill set to a nonprofit that you really like, and this is a way to explore having a different kind of relationship. So I think there's a lot of different paths to figuring out how ready you are. Ultimately, it comes down to how ready you feel to take on the risks of doing that or not doing it. Because that's the other part of it, is if you don't do it, there's risk there too. There's risk of becoming so unhappy, you stop doing your job very well, and then you end up having to leave anyway. So it's, to me, it's more like a risk exchange.
That was very good. Risk exchange. I never thought about it that way. Like, I would always think like, okay, if I want to become an entrepreneur, I am risking what I have. But you're so right. Like, by not doing that also, I am risking what I already have because I'm so distracted in a way, right? I'm not able to give my 100%. Wow, I like that. Thank you.
Welcome.
So I see a few questions in the chat. So I see a question from Oyen, and she is asking, as a management consultant, what tools, programs do you use day to day currently? Also, do you have tips on improving time management skills?
Oh my gosh, time management is like, I have so many templates. Okay, so tools, I think, the tools I commonly use, we actually use a Zoho stack. So we use Zoho CRM, we use Zoho projects for our project management tracking. I use Gmail a lot because I just constantly communicating. I use Zoom a lot now because this is the only way we're gonna meet each other. And most of my work falls into the presentation category. So I use a lot of PowerPoint templates or Google presentation templates to tell a story about what we're trying to make happen. I would say in terms of tool set, that's probably, and my phone, because I also check email when I take walks. And, time management. So I am constantly curious about managing my own time. And I have adopted techniques, or I created some techniques for myself, but then I heard about these other techniques and I integrated a lot of those techniques into my system. So now it's like a hybrid version of Pomodoro and bullet journaling. So I don't know if anybody here has heard of bullet journaling, but the minute I saw that, I was like, ooh, that's kind of like what I'm already doing, but they have more fun and visually driven categorizations, which I really liked. So bullet journaling is about creating large categories that everything that you want to do fits into. And then it's almost like a project management tool where you just break it down into smaller and smaller steps until each step becomes an actionable item or something you track or something that goes onto your calendar. I keep an annual review of my own goals, personally and professionally, meaning my personal goals and my goals for the Matic. I have a monthly tracker where I track all the things I want to keep track of during the month. And it's everything from how many miles I rode my bike that month to how many times I tracked the food I was eating, to how many meetings I've had, and how much networking I've done. And some of those metrics then get translated or come out of things like Zoho CRM. And then I also have a daily tracker that's where the Pomodoro technique gets a little bit infused, where I don't remember, is Pomodoro every 20 minutes or every 10 minutes? Sorry, I can't quite remember what Pomodoro does, but I track every 15 minutes. So I have a template that has a list of all the different categories of things I'm going to do for the day. And then a block, like a grid that's separated for every 15 minutes. And every 15 minutes I stop and I mark which of those things I worked on for that 15-minute time block. And I have that going from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. so that I can see what I'm doing. And it helps me see sometimes when I'm not having a great day. Sometimes it helps me see that I've actually done a lot. And sometimes it helps me see that, oh, I need to get better at doing this tomorrow. It just depends on the day. That daily tracker also includes all the tasks, the personal tasks I need to focus on outside of the work stuff. And it reminds me to do my daily gratitude meditation, which doesn't happen every day, but it's in there as a reminder.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kariz, for all the tips. So we have one more question for you from Namrata. Sure. And she's asking, what weightage a beginner should give while joining a job in terms of culture fit versus competence fit, or both?
That's a tough one, right? Because if you're the one deciding on competence fit, first, maybe I'm a little confused by the question, but competence fit, I believe the employer will decide whether or not you're competent enough to do the job, right? So if you get that job, don't worry about whether or not you're competent. You are, because you got the job. Can we just settle on that? I've heard that a lot. Like, a lot of folks have told me, I don't know if I'm ready to do this job, but I've been working here for 6 months. I'm like, well, you got the job. So that means somebody believes in your competence enough that whatever gaps you had, you can fill by learning. In terms of culture fit, I think it's really hard to tell, right? Because if they really like you, of course they're going to be wooing you before you show up. And a lot of that, a lot of the nuances of your relationships won't appear until you've been there a few weeks or a few months or even a few years. And over time, all of that, all the people there are also evolving and also moving in and out of departments or moving in and out of the company. So that also will continue to evolve. I think that my response to that would be, you know, if you have an instinct, like if your instinct says this is giving me a red flag, or there are not enough women on this team, I don't think I'm going to enjoy that. You know yourself best. You can make those decisions, and you know, if you need it, I give you permission to make those decisions. But ultimately, it's about making the best out of that situation when you're in there. If for some reason you were excited at the beginning and you show up and it turns out there was one person who didn't interview you, and that person is the one that's dominating the conversation, and suddenly you don't like this team, then find the best way to support that team until you develop your skills or find another path. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And thank you so much for all the answers. We are over time. I see somebody's asking us to kind of type in the name of the tools that you mentioned. So one was bullet journaling. Is that?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Bullet journaling, Pomodoro technique.
These are the two, right?
Yeah. I think there's a couple of other time management techniques or productivity methodologies. I think they are all really great. The thing is to find the thing that works for you.
Yeah, thank you so much. So a lot of comments coming in, thanking you. What a great talk it was, and
thank you so much.
Enjoyed, and I really appreciate everybody joining us today. We ran a little bit over time, so thank you so much, Kariz, once again for this great session. We look forward to working with you more in future, and thank you again, everybody. Have a great evening.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody.